This homeless girl saves a millionaire from a scam, but minutes later, something shocking happens. Please rate my story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. Theodore Ted Vanderbilt adjusted his tie for the third time that Monday morning, gazing out the panoramic windows of his office at the bustling streets of downtown Manhattan. At 30 years old, the New York businessman proudly managed Vanderbilt Construction, a chain of 5 home improvement stores that he had expanded over the past 8 years, transforming the small family business into a regional empire. His net worth, built through careful investments in stocks and bonds, exceeded $2 million, a considerable fortune for someone his age. Mark Thompson, his 42-year-old accountant, waited on the other side of the mahogany desk with a briefcase full of documents promising to solve the company's tax problems once and for all. The man with the dark-rimmed glasses and neatly trimmed beard smiled confidently as he organized the papers, explaining how transferring some assets to a new corporate account would protect Ted's capital from the high tax rates that were stifling small businesses in the state. The conversation flowed naturally when a nearly imperceptible noise caught Ted's attention. Behind the brown leather armchair near the bookshelf, a small figure moved with extreme caution. It was a girl of about 2 years old, too thin for her age, with disheveled brown hair and dirty clothes that were clearly not hers. Her large, frightened eyes watched every movement of the 2 men as she tried to remain invisible. Ted frowned, trying to understand how a child had entered his office on the 10th floor of a commercial building, but Mark continued talking about compound interest and profitability, seemingly oblivious to the presence of the little intruder. The girl, whose name was Isabella, had climbed the emergency stairs after spending the morning begging for change in the park across from the building. Her hunger was so great that she decided to explore the building in search of scraps of food, taking advantage of the movement of employees during lunchtime. What she didn't expect was to find 2 male voices discussing numbers that her mind, despite her young age, understood with frightening clarity. Mark pointed to a specific clause in the contract, explaining how changing the company's name would allow for savings of thousands of dollars per month in taxes. Ted picked up the gold pen, a graduation gift from his father, and prepared to sign when he heard the girl's high-pitched, desperate voice. "He's robbing you." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark paled instantly, dropping his glasses in the process, while Ted turned to find the terrified eyes of the child who had emerged from behind the armchair. Isabella trembled, realizing that she had exposed herself, but something inside her couldn't remain silent in the face of what she had witnessed. For the past 2 months, while begging near Mark's accounting office, she had overheard phone conversations where he mentioned shell accounts and money that didn't belong to him. Her extraordinary memory for details had recorded every word, every name, every value mentioned in these conversations. Mark stood up abruptly, his face red with anger and despair. "Ted, don't listen to a street kid. She doesn't understand anything about what she's talking about." But Ted watched the girl's expression closely. There was something in her eyes that made him hesitate, an intelligence that contrasted sharply with her fragile and abandoned appearance. "How do you know this, little one?" he asked, crouching down to be at Isabella's level. The girl glanced nervously at Mark before answering. "I heard him talking on the phone about a shell account and taking your money. He said he was going to use fake paper." Mark tried to approach the child, but Ted stopped him with a firm gesture. The suspicion that had been growing in recent months about certain financial movements of the company gained strength. He had noticed discrepancies in the reports, suppliers he didn't know, payments to companies with strange names. Isabella continued, her voice small but determined. "He said he was going to open a store, just like yours, in the next town over. He said you'd never find out because you trust him too much." The girl's words hit Ted like a punch to the gut. Mark had been his right-hand man for 5 years, the man in whom he had placed complete trust to manage the company's finances. The possibility of betrayal was devastating, but the specific information the child provided was too detailed to be fabricated. Mark realized that his charade had been exposed. Without a word, he quickly packed the documents into his briefcase and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Ted shouted, but the accountant had already disappeared down the hallway. The sound of his hurried footsteps echoed through the building until the elevator noise indicated his definitive escape. Ted was left alone with little Isabella, processing the magnitude of what he had just discovered. His investments, his wealth, everything he had built with so much effort was at risk. Ted ran to his computer and immediately accessed the company's banking system, his fingers trembling as he typed in the passwords. What he saw on the screen made him stagger. Vanderbilt Construction's main account showed a balance of only $340. $800,000 had disappeared from the account overnight, transferred to a company called Build Right Materials, Inc. that he had never authorized. Isabella remained motionless near the armchair, watching the reaction of the man she had just saved. Her experience on the streets had taught her to recognize despair, and she could see that Ted was panicking. "Oh my God, he took everything," Ted murmured, running his hands through his hair. "How am I going to pay the 47 employees? How am I going to keep the 5 stores running?" The reality of the situation hit him like an avalanche. Mark had not only stolen the company's money, but had also prepared a scheme that would leave Ted without resources to turn to. The documents he almost signed would transfer the legal ownership of the company to a shell account, leaving him with nothing. Isabella approached timidly. "Are you sad, mister?" she asked in her childish voice, but laden with a premature maturity that life on the streets had imposed on her. Ted looked at the girl for the first time with full attention. She was extremely thin, her clothes were too big and clearly not hers, and there was a deep sadness in her eyes that no child should carry. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to control his own anxiety so as not to scare the little one even more. "Isabella," she replied, nervously playing with the hem of her dirty shirt, "but everyone calls me Izzy." "And where are your parents, Izzy?" The question made the girl's eyes fill with tears. "Mummy's sick in the place where they sleep on the street. Daddy left when I was a baby." Ted felt his heart clench. Even in the midst of his own crisis, he couldn't ignore the suffering of the child who had saved his company. "And you were alone here in the building. How did you get up to the 10th floor?" "Through the emergency stairs," Isabella admitted, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I was looking for food. I haven't eaten since yesterday." The girl's confession made Ted momentarily forget his own problems. He opened the desk drawer and took out a granola bar that he kept for emergencies, offering it to Isabella. She took the food with reverence, as if it were the greatest treasure in the world, and began to eat slowly, savoring every bite. As the girl ate, Ted began making desperate calls. First he tried to contact the bank manager, then his lawyer. But it was Monday morning and many people were not yet available. With each unanswered call, his anxiety increased. Isabella finished eating and watched Ted with curiosity. "Why did the man with the glasses want to steal from you?" she asked. "I don't know, Izzy. People sometimes do bad things for money," Ted replied, surprised by the girl's ability to observe. "My mom always said that money doesn't buy happiness, but without it we go hungry," Isabella commented, with a wisdom that contrasted with her young age. The girl's simple sentence touched Ted deeply. He'd spent years focused only on accumulating wealth, investing in stocks and expanding his business, but he had never stopped to think about the people who didn't have even the basics to survive. He finally managed to speak with Dr. Robert Miller, his lawyer. The conversation was devastating. It would be almost impossible to track the money quickly, and even if they could prove the fraud, the process would take months or years. Meanwhile, Ted would have no way to keep the company running. I need to go to the bank in person, Ted said to himself, then looked at Isabella. You can't stay here alone. Do you have somewhere to go? The girl shook her head negatively. I can wait here quietly. I know how to be quiet. Ted looked at the fragile child and made an impulsive decision. No, you're coming with me. I'm not going to leave you alone. On the way to the bank, Isabella walked alongside Ted through the busy streets of Manhattan. It was the first time in months that she had walked next to an adult who cared about her well-being. People looked strangely at the well-dressed businessman accompanied by the girl, clearly in a situation of homelessness. But Ted didn't care about the looks. At the bank, the situation proved even worse than he imagined. The manager, Michael Davis, confirmed that the transfers had been authorized with documents that appeared legitimate, including his own signature. Mark had forged his signature perfectly, using documents he had collected over the 5 years as the company's accountant. Mr. Vanderbilt, we are very sorry, but without a court order, we cannot reverse these transactions, the manager explained, clearly embarrassed by the situation. Isabella, sitting in the chair next to Ted, listened to everything attentively. Suddenly, she pulled on his shirt sleeve. The man with the glasses said he was going to meet a woman at the bank today. He said she worked here and that she was going to help him get more money. Ted and the manager exchanged glances. What woman is he? Do you remember her name? The girl closed her eyes, concentrating. Lauren. He called her Lauren. He said she was his wife, but he didn't like her anymore. The manager paled. Lauren Peterson. She works here as a special accounts manager. Isabella's revelation opened a new lead in the investigation. Lauren could be Mark's accomplice or another victim of his manipulations. Ted needed to find out the truth, but first he needed to resolve a more immediate question. What to do with the girl who had saved his company and now depended on him not to return to the streets. While waiting to speak with Lauren, who was in a meeting, Ted watched Isabella leaf through a children's magazine in the bank's lobby. The girl pointed to the figures and mumbled numbers, demonstrating a familiarity with mathematics that surprised the businessman. Izzy, how do you know so much about numbers? He asked. My mum taught me before she got sick. She said I was special with numbers, the girl replied, without taking her eyes off the magazine. I can remember everything that people say when there are numbers in the middle. Isabella's extraordinary ability with numbers and her exceptional memory began to make Ted realize that the girl was not just an ordinary child in a situation of vulnerability. She possessed skills that could be fundamental to completely unraveling Mark's scheme and recovering his stolen assets. Lauren Peterson appeared in the bank's lobby an hour later, an elegant woman of 35 with a worried expression. When she saw Ted waiting, her face paled visibly, and she glanced nervously around before approaching. Isabella watched her closely, immediately recognizing her from the descriptions she had heard in Mark's phone conversations. Mr. Vanderbilt, Lauren said in a trembling voice, I imagine you want to talk about my husband. Ex-husband, Ted corrected, remembering Isabella's comment. And yes, I really need to talk to you about what Mark did to my company. Lauren led Ted and Isabella to a private meeting room. The bank manager seemed to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown, her hands trembling as she arranged some papers on the table. I knew this day would come, she sighed. For over a year, I've been trying to divorce Mark, but he always finds a way to threaten or blackmail me. Isabella, sitting silently next to Ted, observed every facial expression of Lauren. Her experience on the streets had taught her to detect when adults were lying or hiding something, and she could see that Lauren was being sincere in her despair. He forged my signature on several bank documents in the last 2 years, Lauren continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. He used my position at the bank to create shell accounts and move money from clients without their knowledge. I found out 6 months ago, but he said that if I reported him, he would make it look like I was complicit in everything. Ted felt a mixture of relief and anger, relief at discovering that Lauren was also a victim of Mark, and anger at realizing that his ex-accountant's scheme was even more elaborate than he had imagined. "Where is my company's money now?" he asked directly. Mark transferred everything to an account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in the name of Build Right Materials. But I know he planned to move the money again today to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, Lauren revealed, wiping her tears with a tissue. "Can we still prevent this?" Lauren checked her watch. "The international transfer is scheduled for 3 o'clock this afternoon. It's 2:15 now. Theoretically, there is still time, but we would need an urgent court order." Isabella discreetly pulled on Ted's shirt sleeve. "I can talk?" she whispered. Ted nodded, curious to know what the girl had noticed. "The lady is lying about one thing," Isabella said, looking directly at Lauren. "The man with the glasses didn't schedule the transfer for 3. He said on the phone that it would be at 2:30, 15 minutes from now." Lauren was perplexed by the accuracy of the child's information. How could she know that? "Isabella has an exceptional memory for details," Ted explained. "She's overheard several of Mark's conversations in recent weeks." The revelation that only 15 minutes remained turned the situation into a race against time. Lauren picked up the phone and began making urgent calls to try to block the transfer. But the bureaucratic procedures of the international banking system made it almost impossible to stop an operation already in progress. "It's not going to happen in time," Lauren said, hanging up the phone after the 5th frustrated attempt. "The international systems have already processed the authorization." Ted felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. In a matter of hours, he had discovered that he would lose not only his $800,000, but also the entire company that had taken 8 years to build. His investments, his wealth accumulated through years of hard work, would all disappear because of the betrayal of someone he fully trusted. Isabella watched the growing despair on the faces of the two adults. "There's one more thing I remembered," she said softly. "The man with the glasses said he had money stashed somewhere else too. He talked about an account in the lady's name, but she didn't know about it." Lauren frowned. "What account? I didn't authorize the opening of any account." "He said he used your papers to open an account at the bank in the town where he was born. He said it was in case there was trouble here," Isabella continued, closing her eyes to concentrate on the memory. "He said Poughkeepsie and talked about 200,000. "Oh my God," Lauren whispered. "He really forged my identity to open accounts in other banks. I need to check this immediately." While Lauren made new calls to banks in Poughkeepsie, Ted watched Isabella with growing admiration. The girl had not only saved his company from being completely stolen, but was now helping to track down money that could be recovered. "Izzy, where is your mother now?" he asked softly. "At the homeless shelter near the pier," she replied, "but she's very sick. She coughs a lot and sometimes faints." "What's her name?" "Connie Silver, but everyone calls her Chacha." The name hit Ted like a lightning bolt. Connie Silver had worked as a cleaner at his company headquarters 3 years ago. She had been fired for allegedly stealing cleaning supplies, an accusation made by Mark Thompson. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in Ted's mind. Mark had not only stolen his money, he had systematically destroyed the lives of several people over the years, including Isabella's mother. "Lauren, were you able to confirm the account in Poughkeepsie?" Ted asked, trying to stay focused on recovering the funds. "Yes, there is an account in my name with $250,000 deposited. But to access the money, I need to go to the bank in person with documents proving that the opening was fraudulent," she replied, showing a glimmer of hope for the first time in the conversation. "How long would that take?" "If we leave now, we'll get there by 5 in the afternoon. The bank closes at 6, Lauren calculated. Ted made a quick decision. "Then let's go. Isabella, you come with us, and from there we'll pick up your mother." The girl smiled for the first time since Ted had met her, a small but genuine smile that lit up her thin face. During the 2-hour drive to Poughkeepsie, Isabella revealed more details about the conversation she had overheard, information that helped Ted understand the extent of Mark's scheme. The former accountant had created a network of fake accounts in several cities, using forged documents from different people to move money stolen from various clients over the years. At the bank in Poughkeepsie, Lauren was able to prove the fraud and block the account, ensuring that at least $250,000 were preserved. It was a small victory in the face of total loss, but it represented a hope that not all was lost. When they left the bank, Ted looked at Isabella and realized that the girl had changed his life in a way he never imagined. "Now, let's go get your mother," he said, taking the girl's small hand. "And then we'll find out everything Mark did to you." The municipal shelter of Manhattan exuded a strong smell of disinfectant mixed with humidity and human suffering. Ted held Isabella's hand firmly as they walked through the narrow corridors, passing people who had lost everything in life. The little girl guided the way with painful familiarity, knowing every corner of that place that had become her home in recent months. "Mommy is in room 17, Isabella said, her voice echoing softly in the dimly lit hallway. When they arrived at the room, they found Connie Silver lying on a thin mattress on the floor, coughing violently while 3 other women shared the cramped space. At 32 years old, she looked 50, her thin face marked by suffering and the disease that was slowly consuming her. "Mommy," Isabella called, running to nestle in her mother's weak arms. "I brought a good man who wants to help us." Connie raised her tired eyes and immediately recognized Ted Vanderbilt. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she whispered, trying to sit up despite her weakness. "What are you doing here?" "I came to get you," Ted replied, crouching down to be at the woman's level. "And I came to apologize for what happened 3 years ago." Tears began to stream down Connie's face. "You believed it when they accused me of stealing. I lost everything because of that. I couldn't get a job anywhere because my record was tainted." "I know, and I'm sorry for that," Ted said, genuinely remorseful. "I found out today that Mark forged the evidence against you. He destroyed your life to cover up his own crimes." During the drive back to Manhattan, in the back seat of Lauren's car, Connie told her story in a voice broken by persistent coughing. After the unfair dismissal, she had tried desperately to find work, but the false accusations of theft followed her in every interview. Without income, she lost the small apartment where she lived with Isabella and ended up on the streets, where her health deteriorated rapidly. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," Connie said, looking directly at Ted. "Isabella has a twin sister." The car almost stopped abruptly. "What do you mean?" Ted asked, turning around. "Valentina has been hospitalized at New York Presbyterian Hospital for 2 months. She was born with a liver problem, and now she needs an urgent transplant," Connie explained, her tears falling on her torn dress. "I can't afford the treatment. I can't even visit her properly because I don't have money for the bus." Isabella held her mother's hand. "That's why I went out to ask for money every day, Mommy, to save up to see Valentina." The revelation of Valentina's existence completely transformed Ted's perspective on his moral responsibility. It was no longer just one child, but 2 twin sisters who needed urgent medical care and a mother who was dying from lack of proper treatment. That night, in his 3-bedroom apartment in the upscale neighborhood of the Upper East Side, Ted installed Connie and Isabella in the guest room. For the first time in months, Isabella slept in a real bed, between clean sheets and with a full stomach. Connie, despite her weakness, couldn't sleep, watching the lights of the city that had once rejected her through the window. The next morning, Ted took Connie and Isabella to New York Presbyterian Hospital to finally meet Valentina. The girl was hospitalized in the pediatric ward, connected to several devices that monitored her vital functions. Despite her illness, she had the same large and intelligent eyes as her twin sister, and when she saw Isabella, her face lit up with a weak but genuine smile. Isa, did you bring friends? Valentina asked in a weak voice. This is Ted, Isabella introduced. He's rich and he's going to help us. Dr. Emily Carter, the doctor responsible for the case, explained Valentina's situation to Ted. She needs a liver transplant urgently. We have a possible compatible donor, but the procedure costs $200,000, including all the tests and the period of hospitalization. Ted quickly did the mental calculations. Of the $250,000 recovered from Mark's fake account, $200,000 would go to save Valentina. Only $50,000 would remain of his entire fortune of $2 million, but he didn't hesitate. Doctor, you can schedule the surgery. I will cover all the costs. Connie burst into tears upon hearing Ted's decision. For the first time in 3 years, there was real hope that her daughters could have a decent future. In the following 3 months, while Valentina recovered from the successful transplant surgery, Ted worked tirelessly to rebuild his company with the few resources he had left. He sold his luxurious apartment and moved to a simple 2-bedroom house in Queens, where he began to live as a family with Connie and the twins. Lauren, who had obtained her divorce from Mark with the help of the collected evidence, became a valuable partner in the reconstruction process. Her banking experience and knowledge of the financial system were fundamental to detecting other irregularities in Mark's old businesses and recovering small amounts that he had stolen over the years. During this period, Ted discovered that his true wealth was not in the stock investments or cryptocurrency investments he had lost, but in the family he had gained. Isabella and Valentina filled him with joy with their laughter and daily discoveries, while Connie, slowly recovering with proper medical treatment, cooked the traditional New England clam chowder that reminded Ted of Sundays at his grandmother's house. The most emotional moment came 6 months later when Ted found an envelope under a pile of Connie's old documents. It was a letter of recommendation written 20 years ago by his own father, Anthony Vanderbilt, praising the dedicated work of young Connie as a maid in the family's house. Connie Silver demonstrates exemplary honesty and maternal affection with my son Theodore, especially after the loss of his mother. I recommend her without reservation to any family that needs someone trustworthy and kind, read the letter with his father's characteristic handwriting. Tears streamed down Ted's face as he realized that fate had reunited the two families who already had a history of mutual care. Connie had taken care of him as a child after the loss of his mother, and now he took care of her family when they needed it most. Mark Thompson was arrested 3 weeks later in Los Angeles, trying to open a new company with falsified documents. The remaining money was recovered, allowing Ted to reopen 2 of his 5 stores and rehire 20 of the 47 employees who had been laid off. It wasn't the wealth of before, but it was an honest restart. At the end of that transformative year, during the traditional Thanksgiving celebrations of the United States, Ted formalized the adoption of Isabella and Valentina, who had been calling him Daddy Ted for months. Lauren, who had become much more than a business partner, accepted his marriage proposal in a simple ceremony at the historic church in Brooklyn. Connie, completely recovered and working as an administrative supervisor at the new headquarters of Vanderbilt Construction, was the girl's godmother at the adoption ceremony. As he watched his daughters play in the backyard of the simple house where they now lived, Ted reflected on how he had lost a fortune in money, but gained an infinitely greater wealth in love and family. Isabella ran to him, holding a drawing she had made at school. "Daddy, I drew our family," she said, proudly showing the paper where 5 smiling figures held hands. "We're all happy now, right?" "Yes, my daughter," Ted replied, hugging the girl who had saved his life in more ways than she would ever imagine. "We are the richest family in the world." If you liked this wonderful story, please comment, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.